Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Colkins Trilogy, also known as Byron Sidious. And for this BitChute video, I'm going to be reading verbatim from my most recent Substack observational essay. Why am I reading something that aloud on video that I wrote up on Substack? Simple. It's not got a great number of views on Substack, and I seem to get more traction when I make videos here on BitChute than I do just typing these things up and publishing it on Substack. So, without further ado, let us get into it. The piece is entitled Their Blindness, My Resentment. It began as these things often do, as a mild nebulous tingling in the back of my mind. For about a year now, in private conversations with friends and colleagues, I've been grumbling about the problems surrounding digital media purchases and the access model that they employ, which boils down to this. You don't actually own any of these digital purchases, you're just renting access to them. The moment you say or do something that the sellers don't like or agree with, they will terminate your account and strip you of that access, and your money is forfeit to them. We see this a lot with video games, especially, with Blizzard Entertainment being one of the most frequent violators of the trust between customer and product producer. I was annoyed and disturbed by this, enough so to have written and submitted an article for publication to the Howard Bloom Institute. They were kind enough to feature the piece on their website, along with a handful of other pieces that I've written up for their consideration. The piece received a modest amount of appreciation for highlighting the problem, which unfortunately remains ever present and actively expanding at this moment, and I'll be talking about that again at some point in the near future. That's part of the reason that I sit here and once more have to point to it as a contributing factor for this tingling in the back of my mind. Something is wrong here, and it is getting steadily worse. Like most folks nowadays in the United States, I spend rather a considerable amount of time watching YouTube and BitChute, and more recently, Rumble videos and live streams, opting to turn to independent content creators and commentators for my news of the day, pop culture observations, and general chatter about those subjects that I find myself enthusiastic about. When one considers how many hours of subject matter are available for viewing or listening to on just these sorts of platforms, it becomes almost questionable why one would remain lashed to services like Netflix, Hulu, and the like. There are amateur animators making indie cartoons, political analysts, news of the day commentary, philosophy lectures, and psychoanalytical talks, and all available ostensibly without charge on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and the free levels of various podcasting applications. Like most users on these platforms, I have a handful of favorite channels that I routinely check in on, either via subscription or by searching for their channels and going through their video lists. This second method I employ for those creators whose material I only occasionally indulge in, rather than subscribing, because I don't want my feed clogged up with every single thing that they do. As one might expect, there's a handful of very popular, successful channels that I keep subscriptions to since they routinely create material and upload, and they touch upon subjects that I like to stay abreast of. Here's just a few of those bigger channels. The Quartering, Timcast IRL, D-Day Cobra, Nerdrotic, Doomcock, The Volgun, Savage Books, Shady Do-Rags, Ricada Law, Geeks and Gamers, The Exploring Series, SCP Animated, Stories of Old, Max Derritt, Ben Shapiro, Jimmy Dore, Jordan Peterson. Sort of a scattershot look at who I tend to follow, yes, but buried within that small sample of channels that I subscribe to and routinely watched or listen in on, there are a few with whom I find myself more and more annoyed as time goes on. Why? Let's examine that. Like, share, and subscribe. If you've been watching YouTube or Rumble for any stretch of time, you are undoubtedly familiar with what has become a pseudo-religious mantra spouted off by nearly every channel that has 100,000 or more subscribers. The mantra is as follows. Remember to hit that like button, share the show or video, and become a subscriber today. Also, don't forget to hit that bell notification icon. The precise wording may change from channel to channel, but this is the boilerplate example of what they're operating off of. A few will explain precisely why they continue to hammer this over their audience's head repeatedly, stating that doing these things helps with the YouTube/Rumble algorithm, though this is far more often brought up regarding YouTube since Google's video sharing platform has long documented problems when it comes to its automated systems. We mostly understand and appreciate why this gets repeated ad nauseum, but for long-standing members of the subscriber base, this has become so rote and tiresome to listen to. Some of us would rather let a bullet ant bite us on the back of the hand than hear it another dozen times or more this week. Just please, we get it. You want people to keep coming back for your content. In the attention economy, he or she who is able to lash the most eyeballs or ear sockets to their channel or brand is going to command the greatest ongoing audience. At least such time as we become so collectively numb to all of you covering the same basic topics as one another that we finally wise up and track down someone who's doing the same damn thing without trying to sell us something on top of the subject matter. You can become a member. Here's where we come to the first facet that I identified. Contemplating this growing whisper in the back of my mind of the greater overall problem that I'm having with these bigger channels and networks. Perhaps I should have written down the exact thoughts I had when I first watched the Jeremy's Razors commercial produced by the Daily Wire, so that I could recall them more accurately here. Maybe not the exact first thoughts, because those were along the lines of, that was pretty funny, and winter flamethrower is not cool to see in action. But shortly after that line of thinking came something else along these lines. Do they think people are really that gullible? I thought this general sentiment in response to Jeremy Boring's question, why give your money to a company that hates you? Well, sorry, Mr. God King of the Daily Wire, but I don't think you exactly give a tin shite about your own audience members, so long as they're buying your products or paying for a membership to your website and service. Sure, maybe you want to cater to a particular breed of customer base, and that's been pretty publicly known. You make no bones about it. I can appreciate that kinds of balls to the wall transparency and honesty in your marketing and branding. You make content for conservatives, by conservatives. Fine, great. Do that because those folks deserve to have products and services just as much as anybody else. But I find it just a little disingenuous that you would, as a corporation, try to say with a smile on your face that you're in it for the little guy or in it for the people who share our values. Because no, you're not. You're in it to turn a buck, to make a profit, and identifying, accurately so, that there's a market there that isn't being appropriately catered to doesn't make you some charitable or noble spirit, fella. It just makes you a shrewd businessman, and nothing more. Spotting that element of demand in the supply and demand baseline economic structure that we partially operate upon here in the United States does not bestow upon you some spirit of nobility or righteousness. It just doesn't. Nor is it a guarantee of any actual quality regarding whatever product you're offering. If I actually enjoy what you're making and find it of high quality, I will use it and I will promote it to friends and family. If it sucks, I will also pass along that information. But it doesn't end here, folks. Not by a long shot. There's the constant calls from people like Tim Pool to head over to his website and become a member so that you can get access to all of our behind the scenes footage, exclusive members only content, blah, 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 blah. I mention him specifically because he's one of the worst examples of this nonsense that has infected YouTube like a shifting parasite that you just can't seem to remove from the body. Don't misread me or attempt to reframe that, by the way, as I know some folks will try to. It isn't a call to censor or get rid of him. It's merely a fervent fucking prayer to readers to be aware that this disingenuous, duplicitous little beanie-wearing cretin will do anything and everything to separate you from your money in his endeavors to supplant the very same media networks that he endlessly complains about so that he can lord over them his new station as the replacement in the culture. As I said to my friend Cortex, that's his username, recently on a YouTube live stream, I would find myself highly entertained if Pool were launched out of a catapult at high speed directly into a brick wall. I'd pay to see that. Between the habit of only addressing commentary when it's paid for in the form of super chats on YouTube, requiring people to pay for access to a Discord server, hawking his own brand of coffee, and trying to sell middling level prog rock music tracks wherever he can outside of Bandcamp, who terminated his account, which is a shitty move on Bandcamp's part. Your job is not to side with a musician or band's politics, it's to distribute their music. All outside of the website spiel, Pool utilizes ad revenue on not only his YouTube videos, but on Stitcher, where his program is released in podcast format. This guy is maximizing his potential passive revenue streams in every way conceivable, and again, that isn't what I find objectionable or egregious. That's what you have to do in order to keep up nowadays and make a profit. I'm not naive enough to think that quality of product alone is going to make it happen for anybody. Period. I know that marketing needs to come in there, but there's a point at which it becomes gratuitous. I have a personal dig to make too, but I'm going to save that for later when I finish aiming my current source of scorn elsewhere. At Jeremy Hambling, aka The Quartering. He's another big channel who has crept right up to the line of tolerable and proceeds to slide first one foot and then the other right past into the territory of please shut up. Between a gilded server that he set up and then effectively abandoned, promising to personally interact on occasion with members and then completely flaking on said promise for months, I still have yet to see any actual interaction from him with other server members. His quote apolitical coffee ran coffee, and now his very own news-focused website, The Publica. It would seem that Weirdo Beardo here is trying to emulate Pool in his own way. Truth be told, there's a bit of an exchange of tactics between these two product producers. It seems that there's Hamley started his coffee company some little while ago, while Poole has had his journalist endeavor going for a couple of years in earnest. But now it seems that they're delving into one another's initial territories, perhaps with an unspoken agreement and understanding that what each of them has succeeded with doing so far can be emulated on the opposite side. The Quartering is a bit more tolerable for me than Tim Pool, largely because when it comes to live stream presentations, Jeremy does do a fair job at attempting to interact with his audience in his chat in more ways than simply compiling and then responding only to paid super chats. He actually will talk to points brought up by the regular Joe Schmo in the standard chat, which has to be pretty challenging, given how swiftly that chat can scroll by. He's also not nearly as self-aggrandizing and full of himself as Poole, possessed of a bit of that aw-shucksy charm that is characteristic of guys born and raised in the Midwest on a steady diet of treat everyone with upfront decency and try to give the other side the chance to explain themselves. That's a good diet, one that I would recommend more people indulge in. It might make the internet a more pleasant place to be. What I think we have a bit of an ongoing problem with both channels is something that I've brought up before, and I brought it up in my Rumble live stream this morning. Tim and Jeremy are starfuckers. They don't have any interest in working with someone or bringing somebody on board unless they've already got an established and sizable audience of their own. And they, Poole and Hamley, can find an angle from which to personally profit and grow their own support base by associating with said third party. When Jeremy talks about his forthcoming Publica, who's the first name he mentions as a journalist working with the outfit? Savannah Hernandez, who already brings to the table name recognition and her own audience, from which he will now benefit. Can we get the names of any other reporters who will be bringing their talents to bear on your project, Jeremy? Likely not. As he has mentioned on several occasions, Mr. Hambley has a master's degree in marketing and probably assumes that it would be a waste of time to try highlighting or boosting up the profile of any contributor of his who has not yet made a splash or an impact to highlight as proof of concept. It's elitist thinking, really, that takes away from some of that everyman vibe that he so clearly wants to continue to capitalize upon. But it hasn't escaped everybody's notice, sir. I've been watching your content long enough now to know better. Not that you would know. I don't pay to make comments to you. On the beanie side of things, have you ever heard Tim Pool mention or bring on guests who are of an artistic persuasion who didn't already command their own legions of fans? He isn't interested in the slightest in actually promoting the creation of culture, which he constantly bangs on about, as he prattles on about. His interest is clearly in only doing so if he can personally, financially profit from it. Lead by example. One of the biggest online personalities, Mr. Beast, speaks to the concept of charity and performing good works for our fellow man. While I find myself avoiding his content in the same way I avoid the romance section in a bookstore, as a result of genuine disinterest and not caring, not because I have anything either personal against either those books or Mr. Beast on a personal level, it's my understanding that he doesn't just talk the talk, but that he also walks the walk, using his wealth and personal influence to genuinely positively change people's lives. He's actively charitable and promotes his own brand on the back of trying to do good for people at random in the world, and that's actually admirable. It's also known as leading by example. a concept that seems to have fallen by the wayside for several of the other big content creators on YouTube and elsewhere online. Once again, I turn my ire upon Mr. Tim Pool, a guy who drones on endlessly about how vital it is to societally and culturally to get married and start families, when he is himself so overcommitted to growing his expanding media empire that he remains unmarried and childless while approaching 40 years of age. Granted, he doesn't have the same TikTok running clock issue as any potential female partner, and I will not name this individual here because she is not the source of my irritation and does not deserve to come under the scrutiny that I am putting forth in this piece. But unless he wants to be the awkward old dad showing up at his kids' PTA meetings or in whatever private school setting that he goes to later on in life, he'd better get cracking on it himself rather than just lecturing his viewers and listeners to do it. Frankly, I have to wonder how many potential partners would recognize that his only sense of commitment is to himself and turn away with a great big nope on their lips. To the lady whose name that I won't mention here, a brief favor to ask. Give that question some serious consideration. Do you think Tim Pool will ever put you and your happiness or well being above his own ego, his own drive to expand his empire, his own business concerns, and expanding cult of personality? Do you for a minute think that this middling musical talent will ever possess the self awareness to identify within himself the shadow and do the hard work of incorporating it into himself as recommended by psychoanalyst Carl Jung? There's a reason that Tim gets pissy when fringe lefties who show up on his broadcast when they tend to exhibit habits or personality traits that he doesn't like about himself. And rather than sitting down and doing some serious self analysis to figure out what this reveals about himself in order to improve as a human being, he just cusses them out, talks over them, and insists that they are in a cult or in a bubble. Sometimes, yes, they are actually in a cult or in a bubble. But rather than doing the hand waving thing that you so hate when they do it to you, Mr. Poole, why not put in the nonprofit work on yourself to improve? It's very simple because there's no money to be made in doing that. Tim Pool is the epitome of a transactional human being. Tim Pool does what Tim Pool does for Tim Pool, and he's even made a point of letting us know exactly that on numerous occasions. If he actually gave a damn about his lady friend or the members of his audience, he wouldn't be so quick to mention his bug out van and going to live in a van down by the river. Stand and fight? No. No, he won't. Not unless he is fiscally threatened. This guy will abandon you in the blink of an eye. Just ask Adam Kriegler. Just own up to it. I've already droned on for quite a while here. We're approaching 20 minutes of read aloud. And I hadn't intended to spend so much time on this. Initially, I was planning on doing a couple, maybe 2 or 3 quick little write ups on Substack and letting it just go to be largely unseen, unheard, and unremarked upon. After all, who the hell am I? I'm just a small timer with no major influence, no massive audience, and no sponsors to speak of. No time for fruits and veggies. Just mix some of this field of greens in a 12-ounce bottle of water and, yeah, no. They're not a sponsor. I have no sponsors. So I have no reason to obfuscate or dissemble with any of you folks. I have nothing to really lose, now have I? But you know why I do that line above so well? Because I've heard it from Dan Bongino and Viva Fry and Rakeda Law and about a half a dozen other self-proclaimed centrist or libertarian or conservative content creators all over the goddamn place. You guys and gals need to branch out a little bit and seek some different sponsorships because it's getting kind of repetitive to hearing the same ads over and over again. I, like many everyday normies, as we are collectively referred to, which I suspect is simply meaning average everyday people, working folks, most of the time, though it does have the aura occasionally of being reductive and insulting and dismissive. We wouldn't really mind all of this self promotion and these efforts to do little more than gain access to our credit and debit card information so that you can bilk us for another month if you would just be honest with us about what you're all about. Are you painting supplies company? Okay, then tell us why your supplies are better than your competitors. Okay? But don't try to also imply that you actually give a damn how our home improvement projects turn out. Please don't be that insulting. Some of us have more than 5 brain cells to clack together for a conscious thought. Nowadays, even we normies have become collectively aware that as companies, as corporations, your objective is to maximize your profits in any way possible so long as it is legal. Never mind if it's ethical, because I don't see how ethical it is to rent people access temporarily to your collection of videos, essays, and articles without providing some means of making a permanent, non-revocable sale of said materials to your audience. Analog is superior to digital for the customer, and I think you all know it. I've never heard of any of these modern day newsies even bringing that concept up in passing. Come to think of it, I've never heard anybody mention it. And we've got Matt Walsh with his What is a Woman documentary, supposedly shattering all kinds of records. And it is a good documentary. It makes a great point. But is this thing ever going to be made available in permanent physical purchase format? Or is it only going to be available to people if they pay monthly for access to your site? Because that seems like a long way to string somebody along just so they can watch something temporarily and never have actual physical access to it. This reminds me of the fact that this is something that should be given consideration, especially by people like Poole and Hambly and the crew of the Daily Wire, since they oftentimes like to bitch and complain about places like the New York Times and the Washington Post having paywalls and then implementing paywalls. Look, we get it. Most of us have accepted it by now and just moved along, even coining such banal phrases as "I respect the hustle," a phrase that needs to march up to and crawl inside an incinerator and pull the door shut behind itself. I, for one, do not accept that phrase, not unless there's at least a modicum of self-awareness expressed by the personality in question. To make use of another old adage that I actually enjoy, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. Just admit that what you're doing is for the sake of making a buck. I'm not so naive as to think anybody putting in as many hours of work as these folks are can do it without expecting some sort of compensation. And in some cases, that compensation is well deserved. And when I refer to well deserved compensation, I'm talking about folks like the folks at Clownfish TV, all right, Neon and Geeky Sparkles. Those two deserve every penny that their work can bring in, quite frankly. And they're a big channel, but I enjoy them, and they deserve to get what they can. My last word on the topic for now. Before I make the final decision to go ahead and put this out there, I curled up in a protective little ball like a rabbit that has caught the scent of a fox near my burrow. What possible good can it do for such a small-time, unheard-of genre fiction wonk like myself to try and speak ill of these giants in the online space? Do I not recognize that not only will this hardly be listened to or seen by anybody, in the case of the Substack to be read, they will dogpile me into oblivion if they do see it. Why invite this inevitable invective that will come from fans of these channels? Why invite that? It's like walking up to the barbican gates of a castle armed with 1,000 soldiers in full plate armor while wearing no armor of my own and flinging a single poorly aimed arrow up over the outer wall. I'm not likely going to hit anything, and I'm just going to be plowed under for my troubles. So I should just let it go, right? Thankfully, I have some truly tremendous friends. Not many. The ones I have are quick to point out that not even trying to make an impact, not saying anything, just remaining silent, is the path of a coward. To paraphrase my friend Galen, nobody thought David could beat Goliath either. Have faith. Additionally, this piece was cut down in its original written format from 6,200 words to around 3,600. It's still a longer piece, perhaps, than it needs to be, but there's a lot of territory to cover. That, and I have a bad habit of going on at length until someone gives me the wrap it up Wordsworth hand signal. That's really all I've got for now. Almost 25 minutes of rambling, bitching, moaning, groaning. But you know what? It deserves to be said, and somebody should hear it. Maybe somebody should pass it along to these people to let them know that not everybody in their audience who remains quiet actually enjoys them. They're well aware that people hate watch them. And I don't hate these people, well, for the most part. I don't hate Jeremy Hambly, the quartering. I don't hate all of the people at the Daily Wire with a vicious passion. I don't hate everybody at the Young Turks, although it's borderline. I do hate Tim Pool, but I can't take away that he says some very accurate things. That's why I continue to listen to his show, because as much as I find him personally despicable and contemptible, I can't take away that there are many accurate points made. And some of the news topics that he touches upon would not otherwise come into my field of view. So there is value there, but there's not much value in anything else he does or says. The only value for him is a dollar sign. Cheers.